So I was out here doing something very uncomfortable for me today, but I wanted to bring this message to light to let everybody know about what's happening right now and what you should do about it. Understand that companies are starting to cancel billions of dollars worth of orders in the retail industry in order to try to level out their inventories. And they're trying to take account as to what has gone on for the last couple of years, as well as where demand is heading, especially with inflation and everything else. I think we know that consumerism is starting to put the brakes on a little bit. But you also need to establish some baselines when it comes to your inventory as well. And although some of those indicators could be concerning in regards to what these companies are doing, especially because it's companies like Walmart, Target, Macy's, the big retailers out there, at the end of the day, you should establish a baseline for your preps to make sure that you don't find yourself going too far into your preparedness items in order to get through a difficult scenario. Yes, right now, I'm sure many people are out there starting to rely on their preps more than they have before. Things are very challenging. People can't afford as much food anymore. People are having a hard time making ends meet. So people are going out and saying, look, I can't necessarily afford all the same groceries I used to get, so I'm starting to supplement with a little bit of the rice I had stored up, or maybe I'm using some of the canned goods out of my pantry, and maybe my rotational pantry isn't being resupplied as often as it used to be. And that's all understandable because a lot of prepping is being able to get through challenging times, and a lot of us are having those right this second. However, if you go too far into your preps, you're going to find yourself in a difficult situation if we ever face that major SHTF style event that we all assume is eventually coming. So set a baseline for your preps and make sure you don't go below it so that way you can still survive something catastrophic if it were to occur. And this also gives you goals and things to consider when it comes to resupply and when it comes to having the financial breathing room in order to maintain what it is you're doing in the sense of progression when it comes to your preparedness. So we can apply this to things like food. You can apply this to ammunition as well. Now that I have a gun range here on the property, I've been shooting a lot more. And unfortunately, my ammunition is dwindling more because of it. Now, I have to set a baseline to make sure I don't dive into my stockpile of ammunition that I need in case things go south or in case we find ourselves in a situation where we can't acquire more ammunition or whatever it's going to be. But if I don't set that baseline, I can just go shooting every single day right in my backyard and have a great time with it and probably get a lot of skills from it. But unfortunately, at some point in time, I might say, oops, I have no ammo, and that's not a very good place to be now, is it? So baselines also need to be reasonable. Don't set these baselines so high that you can't use your preps if you need them, and don't set them so high that you stop yourself from progressing in many ways. So for example, if you say, well, I always have to have a year's worth of food on hand no matter what, and then things get very tight financially or very difficult, or inflation goes so high that you literally can't afford the groceries you used to count on. Well, you're not going to dive into that year's supply worth of food if that's all you have on hand because you said you won't go lower than a year's supply of food. What's the point of having that large of a supply of food on hand if you can't ever use it? So make sure your baselines are more reasonable. Saying I won't go less than a month's worth of food is more reasonable than a year. And the same could be for ammunition. You could say I won't have less than 1,000 rounds per firearm, or you could say I won't have less than 10,000 rounds. Well, if you only have 10,000 rounds and you say that, that's great. Unfortunately, if you find yourself in a position where you can no longer acquire more ammunition or you can't afford ammunition, now you're just not going to train or do any shooting for however long that's going to be because you won't go lower than that 10,000 round limit. And there are some arguments to be made to say, hey, well, some of that training and the skills that you need to build and continually progress in will be worth more by shooting some of that ammo than having tons of ammo that you're not even good at shooting. So these are things to consider that you definitely need to put into place. Now, I think baselines are very important, especially when it comes to consumables. Anything that can actually be consumed and then doesn't exist again without resupply is something that baseline should exist for. But you have to decide what that baseline is going to be. I can't decide it for you because everybody's different circumstances have a different equation, aka if you have a family of 5, your bottom line, baseline is going to be different than a single person, and that applies to just about everything. So make sure that your baselines make sense, but don't limit yourself so hard that you can't use any of your preps either, especially in these challenging times. I hope this helped you out a little bit. These conversations need to happen, and we need to talk about these things more often because there are a lot of people who are still new to the game. There's a lot of people who maybe just got into preparedness over the last couple of years, and I'm sure some of those people are struggling right now with what to do about their cost of living and their challenging, bills and financial situations that they currently have, and they see these preps that they've stored up over the last couple of years, and they're wondering, well, should I use them? Should I open that food bucket? Should I actually get into some of the things that I have stashed away for a really bad situation? Or should I just never touch it ever and at the same time be suffering in the process? These are all things you really have to consider. So baselines are great. Make sure you use ones that are reasonable and don't find yourself in a situation where you disallow your ability to use any of the preps that you've worked so hard on. And look, if you have things to add to this conversation, leave it in the comments below. I think it's a good conversation for us to have, and maybe you don't have to give away your OPSEC or anything, but give some people ideas about baselines. You could say, hey, I think 3 months worth of food is a great baseline because you don't want to have less than that in case things get really bad, but at the same time, that means if you have a year's worth of food, you can eat for 9 months and still feel pretty good. And all that kind of information is great to share because everybody has different experiences, different perspectives, different environments, and different requirements when it comes to the size of their family or whatever else it is. So I think that kind of conversation is great to have. And if you need anything else from me, you can always go to magicprepper.com. But besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.